This video is an introduction to tissues. If you think back to the levels of organization, cells make up tissues. So tissues are going to be groups of similar cells that will have a similar kind of function. There are four major types of tissue. Epithelial tissue covers things and lines things. Connective tissue does just what it sounds like. It connects, it brings parts of your body together. Muscular tissue has the unique ability for movement, and nervous tissue has unique ability to transmit information or nerve impulses from one part of your body to another part of your body. So we would expect to find epithelial tissue on like exterior surfaces or maybe on interior cavities. And we would expect to find connective tissue all around your body because it protects and supports and connects your body, like bone, for example. Muscular tissue, we're going to expect to find that attached to bone because it has to do with movement. But sometimes the movement is not like a lever around your bones. Sometimes it's like your heart beating or maybe food moving through your digestive tract. Nervous tissue, basically we'll find that around the brain. That's where you'll find most of it, brain and the spinal cord. And it's involved in communication. Now, tissues can be a little bit more specific. For example, there's a subcategory of epithelial tissue that consists of a mucous membrane. So membranes are slightly different because they secrete something. And it's not rocket science, but mucous membrane secretes mucus. And you would expect to find those in cavities and areas where things are entering the body, like your nasal cavity, for example. Or where there's an opening to your body, like your anus, for example. Will have mucous membrane around that large intestine. Serous membrane is going to be a type of epithelial tissue that lines your internal organs, and it's going to secrete serous fluid, which it helps the organs kind of slide around past each other so that there's some lubricant as your organs are moving around. Cutaneous membrane is another type of epithelial tissue where that's a word that describes your skin. So your skin is an example of a cutaneous membrane. Now, those are all epithelial tissue membranes. But there's another type of membrane called synovial membrane, and that secretes synovial fluid, and we find it in synovial joints. So that's a connective tissue type. And like your elbow, a synovial joint is a freely movable joint. So let's look at epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue covers and lines. That's its major job. So it's going to offer things like protection. Well, from what? Invasion and injury, mostly. That's like something trying to get into your body, let's say. But it also offers permeability. For example, epithelial tissue will cover and line the alveoli, the little tiny air sacs in your lungs, but it allows carbon dioxide and nutrients to cross that membrane. It also lines the inside of your digestive tract, which allows nutrients to enter your body. It deal with secretion. We looked at some of those membranes, like mucous membranes secreting mucus, or serous membranes secreting serous fluid. And your cutaneous membrane would secrete things like sweat, let's say, which helps regulate your body temperature. And then if you remember the cilia that were attached to some cells, that has this like sweeping motion, and that helps move fluid and particles either out of your respiratory tract or along your digestive tract. Epithelial tissue has several things in common. In other words, you can kind of recognize it by certain traits. One of the traits you're looking for is it covering or lining something? So for example, if this area up here is empty, you're looking at a microscope slide, and this area up here is empty, then the next layer of cells is probably going to be epithelial tissue. That epithelial tissue is attached to some kind of basement membrane. So it's going to have some kind of basement membrane where it attaches to some other tissue, like connective tissue. The cells are going to be attached by junctions, like these connections between cells. The lateral surface and basal surface are where these cells are either connecting to each other or connecting to the basement membrane. So those are, again, going to be some junctions kind of holding those cells together. The apical surface is going to be touching nothing. The basal surface is going to be connected to that basal membrane. This layer or connection in between those epithelial tissue cells is called the lateral surface. When you try to classify epithelial tissue, they're classified based on shape and layers. 3 kinds of shapes, 2 types of layering. The 3 kinds of shapes are squamous or squished, cuboidal or cube-shaped, and columnar or columnar that look like a column. The layer types are either simple, where you have 1 layer, or stratified, where you have multiple layers. This layer in between is called pseudostratified because it looks stratified, but it's not really. Pseudostratified. So you could have a epithelial tissue that is simple cuboidal epithelial tissue, or you could have it simple columnar, or you could have stratified squamous, depending on the shape and layer. Here's some examples of epithelial tissue. Here's what you would see under the microscope. Here's what we're looking at in terms of a diagram. You'll notice we've got 1 layer of cells. You'll notice that they're lining the inside of this tube, or like that, or like this. And you'll notice that they're shaped like a cube, so simple cuboidal epithelium. Here's another example of epithelial tissue. Notice again that it's the apical surface and it's lining something. So all this out here is pretty much empty. And this would be simple and squamous or squished. Here's another example where this has cilia on it. And you'll notice again it's lining this open area here. The cells are simple, but they're long and column shaped. So simple columnar, and these happen to be ciliated. There's another example of a ciliated columnar cells, but they're pseudostratified. So we've got this pseudostratified columnar layer of epithelial cells. Squamous and stratified. So it's these thin, squished cells, but there's a whole bunch of layers of them all packed in together. Here's an example, again, of a type of epithelial tissue that's stratified. So we're looking at a whole bunch of cells layered up, and they're squished cells, so squamous. Here's an example of stratified cuboidal cells. So they're cube-shaped, but there's multiple layers, so they're stratified. Here's an example of some stratified cuboidal cells. So when you think of epithelial tissue, you're looking for the covering tissue and the basement membrane. That covering tissue is going to either cover or line some surface. All right? That's going to create some permeability or protection, typically. You can think of it as simple, so all the ones on this side are simple. All the ones on this side are stratified. So simple squamous, stratified squamous. Simple cuboidal, stratified cuboidal. Simple columnar, stratified columnar. You have stratified squamous cells that are being produced close to the basement layer. And as new cells are pushing the old ones up, the old ones fill with a protein called keratin. One of the ways you notice a protein is an ion ending. So that keratin is filling those cells and pretty much killing them. Now the good news is that creates a protective waterproof layer on your skin. But the process of keratinization just means as that cell is pushing up closer to the surface, it's losing its nucleus, it's losing its functions as a cell. It simply fills with keratin and creates a waterproofing layer around your epidermis. That's where we're going to end this video. We'll pick up with other tissue types in the next video.